So we're continuing our series on the book of Hebrews, and this series entitled Greater. So last weekend, the family, we made a trip to Cleveland, Ohio area for our nephew's wedding. It was about a 3.5-hour drive for us. Jackie, our daughter, came from Cincinnati. Jenna, our middle daughter, came from Indianapolis. We came from here. And as many of you who are the family drivers, anyone the family driver in the room, like you just know you're the one that ends up driving, that's me. There comes a point on the drive when you're all alone, even though there's other people in the car. So I have a picture, but I asked Jill permission because at one point this is going on a 3.5-hour. What a refreshing 3.5-hour nap my family had. So I took a picture, don't do this, and sent it, absolutely don't do it, to the group family chat. And my son-in-law sent this picture of Jenna, who is out, like mother, like daughter, like son. So we went to the reception afterward, and I asked Jack, who is my daughter Jackie's boyfriend, and he brought her over. I said, "Didn't you get our pictures?" And he said, I don't text when I drive. I'm like, oh, self-righteous. Like, welcome to the family, right? So one of the things that happens when you fall asleep in the car, I mean, I wouldn't know, but when you fall asleep in a car on a road trip is that you wake up and you have no idea where you are. Those of you who, sleep in cars, you realize that, right? Because multiple times I have had Jill ask me, groggy, where are we? Ultimately, the answer is I don't know, somewhere in Ohio, somewhere. But when you fall asleep, thankfully, with a driver you trust, you can rest assured that they're going to get you to the destination, even if you miss vast chunks of the journey. Does that sound spiritual? It is. Because it's true in a car, it's also true in life. And this metaphor for me has been powerful in my life of times that I have fallen asleep, spiritually, relationally, mentally, and times that I have then awakened, like, Lord, I'm sorry, I fell asleep again. You see, because it's easy, I think, to get lost in the middle of life. It just is. To fall asleep on the journey and lose track of where you are, maybe where you're going amid the day-by-day responsibilities of life. It just gets a little overwhelming. I find that it's easy to forget my overall purpose. Even in the midst of serving the Lord, I have to have it written down, visualization somewhere, so I can remember what are the things that are ultimately important to me? Why am I working? Why am I serving? Why am I going to school? The day-by-day responsibilities. I'd like to tell you it gets easier when you get older, but it doesn't. It just doesn't. In fact, the reality is that life when you get older seems to speed up. It really does. It just seems to go faster. Days go by faster. Summers seem shorter. Literal years can fly by. How many times have we had this conversation in my family? Was that 5 years ago? No, that was 15 years ago. Oh, when did that movie come out? During the Reagan eras. Oh, my goodness. Do you remember when you were young how long the days seemed to be at times? So there's a reason for this. Like I was reading this article recently about this phenomenon of time speeding up as you get older and why it feels that way. Time doesn't, I don't want to get relativity and all that. Time does, but so no, don't email me STEM people, right? So time's fairly steady, right? Our experience of it. And when you get older, it seems to speed up. And this article said it's because of our curiosity about new experiences when we were young. So when we are younger, everything's new. You're naturally curious. You're learning new things every day. And so your brain is creating space for you to learn the new things. And it gives you the perception of taking a long time to create those categories for the experiences you're having. Oh, that's what a sunset looks like. It slows down as your brain creates that spot. Oh, that's what it feels like when you try to jump that ditch with a bike and land up with stitches across your nose. Time seems slower because your brain's creating new places for experiences. But you get older, and you've already done all of those things. Time seems to go by faster because your brain goes on auto mode and just rushes through the things you already know. So you think about your drive here. The vast majority, some of you probably fell asleep, but the vast majority of us, did not appreciate the trees, the drive, the sun, on the way here. We just went to the church, right? Because we'd been here before. We don't need to pay attention to that sunset because we've seen it before. We don't have to think about that drive to work because we've done it hundreds of times. So time flies by because we fast track our daily experiences by assuming we know what is coming by habit. It can happen in our relationships with one another too. Where once you could not wait to see your spouse when you were dating or courting. You couldn't wait. You relished every moment together. Instead, today, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, you instead wake up and go, wow, are you still here? Right? People who have lost their spouses will urge you, relish and delight in every new moment, because you never really grow old when you delight in the new. You never really grow old when you delight in the new. Imagine if this were the first time you had ever heard the Bible read. Imagine if this is the first time you have ever heard that there's a God who loves you. This day, these next 30 minutes would feel like an eternity because you're learning. You've heard all of this before. It's going to seem to go fast, trust me. But I wonder if it's possible for us to actually delight in new things, even the old ones. This is the greater way to live. So in this series entitled Greater, we come to what is called the main point in the letter. In fact, that's what the writer of Hebrews says. This is my main point. I'm so thankful for that. They tell us, this is the main point. In fact, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be in the main chunk of Hebrews, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. This is a powerful section because he spent 7 chapters encouraging and warning, teaching individuals to not go back to the old way. They were Jews who had become followers of Jesus, and they were tempted to go back. And he's saying, please don't go back because Jesus is greater. Jesus is better. The way of Jesus, following Jesus, is better than any other way of doing life. Even if you fall asleep while following Jesus, the way is still better. Amen. The new way is better. I so appreciated Thad's message last week about Melchizedek. I'll never forget that image of Melchizedek with the turban flowing in the wind. Make sure you check that sermon out if you weren't here for that. Hebrews 8 lands the plane by telling us the main point, that in Jesus we have an eternal living high priest who mediates for us a new covenant. A lot of important words in these verses. So hear this. It starts at the end of chapter 7 and goes into chapter 8. God appointed his son with an oath. Remember that word oath. We're going to come back to it. And his son, Jesus, has been made the perfect high priest forever. So here's the main point. I love that. Many other books of the Bible, you have to argue about, I'm not even sure what the main point. Here's the main point. Here's the main point. We have a high priest who sat down in the place of honor beside the throne of the majestic God in heaven. And there he ministers in the heavenly tabernacle, the true place of worship that was built by the Lord and not by human hands. Jesus is a new and greater high priest that ministers in a heavenly tabernacle forever. Now, these words will not have the same impact on you because you don't have a high priest, a living high priest. We weren't a part of that high priestly system, the Jewish system. high priest's calling was a high calling. They were the mediators between the people and God. He was the highest religious figure in Judaism, the high priest. They would oversee the happenings of the temple or the tabernacle, the holy place, that temple where heaven and earth met and God was present. The high priest was a representative of God. In essence, to get close to God, you got close to the high priest. He ran the system. He represented God to the people and the people to God. Through the high priest, people walked with God. So we miss the importance of this statement that Jesus is now the high priest because we don't have one other than Jesus. But when the Hebrew letter was written, let's say around 65 AD, it's kind of a general guess. In 65 AD, there was a high priest. We actually know his name thanks to Josephus, the Jewish historian. The high priest, when this letter was written, was a man named Matthias ben Theophilus. And the Hebrew writer is saying, Jesus is greater and better than Matthias. They could point to it, a whole system that still existed. And like Caiaphas, who was the high priest that had Jesus killed, he used his Roman political connections in order to crucify the true high priest. Matthias ben Theophilus was corrupt as well, the same way as Caiaphas. In fact, he was killed in 67 AD by a Jewish rebellion that was sick of how the high priests had sold themselves out to the Roman government. So don't miss the impact of these words in Hebrew 8 in the original context. We have a high priest. He's not Matthias ben Theophilus. His name is Jesus, and he ministers in a heavenly temple, not the temple that you can go to in Jerusalem that was still standing in 65 AD. It's going to be destroyed in about 70 or 72 AD. But when the Hebrew letter was written, the high priest was still there, the physical temple was still there, and so listen, it was death-worthy for this letter to be written to say, you know what? All of that has been superseded by Jesus. There's no equivalent for us to truly understand it. I mean, the closest we can come during this election season is to say, you're going to vote on a governor, but we have one governor. His name's Jesus. That's the closest. And there's one president. His name's Jesus. And he lives in a White House in heaven, not this current White House. Or we have an eternal Pope, Papa, Father, who lives in a heavenly Vatican, not in Rome. He is forever the Father and Papa. I want you to feel the confrontative weight of this claim, for the Hebrew writer is next going to introduce an important idea, a main idea that we have today. That is the old system, the system of temples and priests and high priests and sacrifices and religious law and chosen people has now been replaced, superseded, and fulfilled by a new and a greater covenant. A new covenant has replaced the old. A new and greater covenant has replaced the old. Now listen to this. Hebrews 8, verse 6 and on. But now Jesus, our high priest, not that guy, has been given a ministry that is far superior than that entire old priesthood. For he is the one that mediates for us a far better covenant with God based on better promises. If the first covenant had been fulfilled, there would have been no need for a second covenant to replace it. With Jesus comes a far better covenant, a greater covenant, a second covenant, a new covenant. And for these things, the early Christians and Jesus himself were killed for saying these things. That's the weight of this. The old covenant, testament, promises are gone. The new one has come and is fulfilled. So I'm going to jump around a little bit in chapters 8 and chapters 9 just for us to understand this. And so Hebrews 8:13 and Hebrews 9:13 are connected. Listen to this. When God speaks of a new covenant, it means he has made the first one obsolete. It is now out of date, and it'll soon disappear. Remember, contextually, this was written before the temple fell, and while there were still priests, and while there was a sacrificial system. It was all done away with in 70 AD, so that the sacrificial system has not existed since that time. Verse 13 of chapter 9, under the old system, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer could cleanse people's bodies from ceremonial impurity. They could get clean. They had to go back and get clean after they dirtied themselves spiritually and with sin, but they could go back and get clean ceremonially. So just think how much more the blood of Messiah, Christ, will purify our consciences from sinful deeds so that we can worship the living God. What cleanses your conscience? Jesus. Not trying harder, not getting it right again. Jesus cleanses your conscience. For by the power of the eternal Spirit, Christ offered himself to God as a perfect sacrifice for our sins. This is why he is the one who mediates a new covenant between God and people. There's a new covenant you are invited to participate in, so that all who are called can receive the eternal inheritance God has promised them. For Christ died to set them free from the penalty of sins they had committed underneath the first covenant. It's deep, it's thick, I get it. A new and greater covenant has replaced the old. It's the main point. There's a new promise. There's a new covenant. So what's a covenant? We need to talk about covenant. Remember, I told you to remember oaths. So there's all kinds of things that we make oaths about and covenants with in this life. You may not actually know that you are part of some covenants. Covenants are contracts with teeth, if you will. This is how I would define a covenant. Covenants are binding and steadying agreements that establish meaningful relationships between people. Let me say it again. Covenants are binding and steadying agreements that establish meaningful relationships between people. Covenants were an everyday part of life for the people of ancient Israel and the nations surrounding them. So that when God talked about having a covenant with Noah, a covenant with David, a covenant with Abraham, a covenant with Judah or Israel, the people didn't go, "What's a covenant?" We do today because it's not necessarily the language we use, but you do swear oaths. The biggest one we think about is marriage. When we participate in a marriage ceremony, two families that are not related, that's an important point, two families, do I need to preach on that part? But two families that are not related form a new family under an oath. In fact, several years ago, I was performing a wedding, and a friend of mine who was not in the party was there as a part of the wedding. And at the end, he came up to me and he said, "You have a lot of power." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You just declared reality." You see, at the end of a wedding ceremony, after oaths have been taken, after vows to love and to cherish until what? Death do us part, in richer, in poor times, in good times, in bad times, in sickness, and in health. Trust me that no 19-year-old understands. I love you, but you just don't, right? You're just like, can we just get to dancing to Cotton Eye Joe? Because I don't get, like, part of my job in premarital counseling is to scare people into marriage. Because these oaths are important. And so at the end of the service, I present to the congregation And I say, by the authority granted to me as a minister of Jesus Christ, I declare they are not married before I say this. I declare that you are husband and wife together in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Those whom God has joined together, let no one put asunder. And all of this oath stuff is to create a new reality to establish meaningful relationships between people. That is a brand new thing. It's beautiful. And it's important. Warring nations or tribes wanted to establish peace. They wrote a covenant. And they would sacrifice with the blood of an animal, saying, if I break my end of the covenant, may what happened to this animal happen to me. Covenants established peace between warring parties. David's best friend Jonathan had a son, King David. His son's name was Mephibosheth. If you remember, Mephibosheth was dropped by his nurse. He then became crippled in his legs. He can no longer make a living. His son, his dad is gone. Saul is his grandfather, and so he's worried about how David is going to respond. David brings Mephibosheth into his household. Don't miss this, establishes a covenant with Mephibosheth and says, you will always eat at my table and you'll be received as an adopted son in my family under a covenant of oath. In fact, those of you who have adopted, you know that there's an oath that comes when you adopt that child. It's not just, all right, give me that one. Like, you make promises. When I was ordained as a pastor, the hands of the elders were laid upon me. The bishop gave me a Bible, and he wouldn't let it go, and I held on to it. And he said, take authority to proclaim the word of God, to participate and celebrate the sacraments, and to bring order to the church. It was an oath I was taking as a pastor. In Michigan, teachers, this doesn't happen in all 50 states, teachers have to swear an oath. Do you know that? Teachers in the room, you do. It's in the law from Michigan of 1935 that teachers have to swear an oath that they will live bigger for the promises that they're making to the students than what they want to do to the student that day, right? There's an oath that is made. This is huge. The president swears an oath to uphold the Constitution. Police officers do it. Firefighters do it. The governor does it. Think back to the oaths that you have sworn, that you have stated. It's one of the reasons Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no, because if this breaks down, society breaks down. If we don't live up to the covenants that we have made, society breaks down. And in an age where we just check the I acknowledge box on a computer screen without reading what Apple told us, most of our oaths are just treated as if we'll break them. You wake up today and you have no idea whether the agreement between us and Iran still stands. Because oaths don't matter for some people. They matter for the people of God. Because God is a covenant God. It is how he has chosen to interact with humans, to make covenants with us of things he will accomplish and we will accomplish. This is covenant. It's why marriage language is used to describe our relationship with God. And it's also, for those of you in the room who are feeling a false sense of guilt or shame because your covenant broke down, do you know that the Old Testament, in essence, says God understands divorce? Because he divorced Israel. It's one of the reasons that he struggled, he made statements about marriage being so important, because he knows what it's like to go through divorce. Now, he brought her back, but just Google it. Did God divorce Israel? And you'll find the scriptures in the Old Testament. God knows what it feels like when a covenant breaks down, and how there's a need for a new covenant that establishes, and God can redeem all of those things. Throughout the Old Testament, there's at least 4 covenants that are made. You have the covenant at the very destruction of the earth by water with a rainbow in the sky called the Noahic, or the covenant with Noah. And God says, by the rainbow in the sky, I will never destroy the earth by water. He promises this, that we don't have to worry about a full destruction of the earth against flood again. Interestingly, that covenant is not two-sided. We don't have to do anything. The world could literally go to hell in a handbasket, defy the Lord, and he will still live up to that Noahic covenant. Second is the covenant with Abraham. Out of all of the families and tribes and nations of this world, God chose Abraham as a representative of humanity to partner with. And he promised to Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, ancestors as numerous as the stars. But God, I'm old. It doesn't depend on you. It depends on me. And out of you, all nations of the world will be blessed. What do you need to do? Abraham, walk with me. Listen to me. Obey me. Third, we have the covenant with Israel, or the covenant with Jacob. Abraham's descendants, particularly Isaac and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. It carried the covenant of God established with Israel from Isaac to Jacob and ultimately to Moses, so that when Moses came along, God had to make a box of the covenant. Let's call it an ark to confuse people. The box of the covenant. And cover it with gold and angels on the top, and put inside of it the 10 Commandments. That's your end to obey the 10 Commandments. Put in the manna, that's my end, God, to provide for you, and Aaron's staff, which budded, which I will bring new life to you, and carry it around with you. For you are the covenant people of God. And then God said to David said, I want to build you a house. And God said, you're not going to build me a house. I'm going to build you a house. And out of your lineage will come a king, so that you will always have a king on the throne from your lineage. And David received it as sonship. So we see him all throughout the Psalms saying, I'm God's son, I'm God's son, I'm his child. And out of him ultimately would come the Messiah, Jesus. Do you see how important these are? And that's not even to mention the covenant God made with Adam, that he made with Ishmael. He made multiple covenants throughout the Old Testament. Beautiful covenants establishing relationship between holy, mighty God and unholy people. And you know what happened? We broke it. We broke it. Like business partners that steal all the money, or a government that breaks its own constitution. Judah and Israel and David and Abraham and the people of God were not able to keep up their end of the covenant. So God did what he said he was going to do. He sent them off into exile. And they go to Babylon for 70 years. And while the people of God are scattered in Babylon because they broke their end of the covenant, they start asking questions like, does God still love us? Have I blown it so much that he's never going to listen to me again? Don't miss this. And right in the middle of their worry in Babylon, God sends the prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah shows up. And he says the words that the Hebrew writer quotes in Hebrews 8. See, I brought that back around. Like, wake up, some of you fell asleep. Listen to these words. But when God found fault with the people, he said, and this is Jeremiah to the Babylonian captives, the day is coming, says the Lord, when I'm going to make a new covenant with the people of Israel and Judah. And this covenant will not be like the one I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they didn't remain faithful to that covenant. I mean, God knows what that's like. I turned my back on them, says the Lord. But this is the new covenant I will make with the people of Israel on that day. I'm going to put my laws in their minds. I'm going to write them on their hearts. They don't have to go find these laws chiseled on some stone somewhere. Through the Spirit of God, we are going to have the presence of God inside of us. I will be their God, and they will be my people, and they'll not even need to teach their neighbors, nor will they need to teach their relatives, saying, you should know the Lord. In other words, go to that place to learn about God. He's going to be inside of you. For everyone from the least to the greatest will know me already, and I'm going to forgive their wickedness, and I will never again remember their sins. Folks, this is huge. Your eternity rests on this new covenant. So what does it mean? Let me land this plane and then we're going to take communion. The new covenant. Remember, covenants are binding and steadying agreements that establish a relationship between people. And now in Jesus, there's an eternal priest who forgives our sin thoroughly. You don't have to go and get that chicken and sacrifice it. You don't even have to go try to make things right. He does. You don't have to come here to say, sorry, Lord. An internal presence that teaches us his way personally. The Spirit of God that walks with us. An empowering relationship that frees us to worship him unashamedly. We are made right before him so that we can come boldly before his throne, and an inheritance of eternal reward awaiting us. Why would you go back to the old? Why would you go back to the old merit-based way of earning our way to God? Now, here's something I want to end with, and then we'll go into communion. 8, 9, 10, and 11, and 12 of Hebrews all goes together, so make sure you read it, because Hebrews 11, the faith chapter, tells us how we become a part of this covenant. Which means, in Hebrews 11, when Abraham's talked about, and Jacob is talked about, and Moses is talked about before Jesus lived, God wasn't so shocked by humans' failure that he said, I got to come up with a plan B, the new covenant. The new covenant has always existed, a way of doing a walk with him. And it was by grace through faith. So that Abraham was justified, even in the old covenant, by grace through faith, not by sacrifices. Moses was justified by grace through faith, even as he's doing the old covenant. It has always existed. It's not an afterthought, for Christ has been crucified from the foundation of the world. This came before us. It'll outlive us. The question is, would you say yes to this proposal by the King? Would you come be a part of his covenant? Because even in the Passover meal was picture of the new covenant. Here's my body broken for you. Here's my blood spilled for you. Absolutely, it was about Israel's release from Egypt, but interwoven in that Old Testament covenant was a glimpse of the new. Forgiveness of sins through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.